Chair. Thank you. Good morning, members, and to everyone who is watching in on our committee meeting this morning. As we know, the committee will be recorded and broadcast through Parliament buildings and online. And you're welcome to use your mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode and all devices are muted. Okay. I'm going to move on to item number 1. I don't have any apologies noted today. And item number 2 is chairperson's business. The Breaking the Glass Ceiling launch. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for participating in the debate on the committee's motion on Tuesday in respect to the Breaking the Glass Ceiling report and the launch event. And as you'll be aware, the Minister was unfortunately unable to attend. And therefore, can I seek members' agreement to write to the Minister and Department to consider the report and how it will follow up on the recommendations? Okay. And I also want to take this opportunity as well, just in the committee this morning, to thank everyone who has participated in this, in the stakeholder event, and participating in the online survey. It has went down very well with the sector and all of those involved. But I want to thank in particular everyone who took the time out to participate, because without your input, we actually couldn't have done this report. Okay, members, the next item is the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board Amendment Order Consultation. Members, further to our discussions a couple of weeks ago on proposals to amend the functioning of the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board, DAERA has published the consultation outcomes on its website and confirmed that it does not intend to extend the scope of the AHDB to work with other agriculture sectors across the various jurisdictions immediately, but we'll take forward intergovernmental discussions on this. Okay. Members, the other item I want to mention is that has been talked about obviously widely in the media is the whole situation, the dreadful situation in Ukraine. Now, obviously, first and foremost, this is a humanitarian crisis on a terrible scale, but obviously this will have a big knock-on effects for the agri-food sector here. Obviously, we rely on Ukraine and for example, for a lot of grain and maize. Fertilizer comes from that Russia, that region as well. So I just think this will have a big knock-on impact on our sector here locally. And I know that the UFU have some suggestions around an agri task force, and I'm aware that other members of the committee have been highlighting this as well. And we've been contacted a lot by farmers who are are facing spiraling input costs, around their diesel and their fertilizer, obviously the feed costs as well. So I think it would be prudent if the committee maybe made representation to the Minister to follow up on what pressed them obviously to make an intervention to support the sector. What does members think about that?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Yes, I think we're living in very serious times. I think the war in the Ukraine is a sad situation for many there. The humanitarian issue is stark, as we see on our TV screens. The importation of grain for feed in Northern Ireland, feed prices I'm told this morning are as high as $3.90 per barley, which is unheard of. I mean, there's also a fear that they may not be able to get the amount of feed they need. So there are big issues, and it will be difficult for the sector. I support the writing to the Minister in relation to this. The difficulty for government is there'll be huge amounts of funding needed to make any difference in the situation. So it is a very dark situation for many farmers. Like, we have fertilizer prices 4 times the price of last year. The red diesel's double the price that it was a fortnight ago, and your feed prices are up. Huge impact, especially in all sectors, but especially the pig and the poultry sectors. All sectors will be affected. There's no doubt about that, because again, everyone's in the same boat. We're having to purchase feed at massive prices. So, I mean, anything we can do, I'm not so sure. It's a difficult situation, but every avenue needs to be looked at to see what help could be
Yeah.
made available. Yeah.
Thank you, William. Philip?
Yes, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, we did agree last week that we would write to the Minister and the Department and invite both the Minister and or senior civil servants to the committee. To my knowledge, they haven't responded. So that in itself, I think is a disappointment. I mean, there is a cost of living crisis that is affecting the general population. And that includes farmers and our rural community in the normal sense of the word. But over and above that, as you have pointed out, there are very specific worries for the agriculture sector that need to be given specific attention over and above the general cost of living crisis. So, I mean, I agree that we need to contact the Minister again. I'm disappointed that he hasn't thought that this is something of an urgent nature, that he would have at the very least responded to the committee's invitation. I have heard him in the chamber make reference to Ukraine, but I haven't heard him suggest solutions. So, you know, I do think that we need to start moving into solution mode, and the Minister needs to be able to bring proposals how he plans or can help the agriculture sector. I mean, it's obviously going to be very difficult given that the DUP have left the executive, and you know that will probably restrict what the executive can do. But I do think the Minister needs to show a bit of urgency to the issue.
Okay, Rosemary?
Thank you. Yes, indeed, I agree with everything that both William and Philip have said. The agricultural sector have been very badly affected, obviously, with the quadrupling in prices of some of the commodities that they use, and also the feedstuff that'll be needed for pigs and hens over the coming months too, and the price perhaps that they'll have to pay for that. I do think that we should contact the Minister with urgency and explain this is an urgent situation and needs immediate attention.
Thank you, Rosemary. Patsy? Patsy, you might be on mute there.
Here. No, sometimes mine switched off on me and stuff. Anyway, Chair, I would support everything that everybody's saying in there. We had a meeting yesterday with Minister McConnell and the similar situation in the rest of the island. People are very, very worried. The stresses that are already on people, the wider community, but particularly the farming sector now. And this literally, unless we have some sort of intervention from central government or wherever it may come from, we're going to be in very, very difficult times where farmers are looking at their stock, not being able to literally feed their stock because of the prices and the level of rates of barley and wheat and other that's coming into the country. It's really, really a pending crisis. And I think we need to have, as soon as possible, even a one-off meeting with the Minister to discuss this, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Patsy. Claire?
Thanks, Chair. It's just maybe on the back of what Philip had said earlier about the Minister has spoken about this in the chamber, but you know we're not hearing about any solutions. I was just reading. I'm just wondering if there's anything that we could do as a committee to come up with solutions. Obviously, meeting the Minister or the officials would be grand as well. But is there something in terms of even meeting with the sector or with RAIS or the researchers to hear what could be done? And just on the back of, I read an article from the Southern Press, I think yesterday, and there was a call then for their agri sector and their farmers to be planting more grain and arable stock as well. Just, what kind of stuff can we encourage our sector to do in order to become a wee bit more resilient to the times that they are facing?
Yeah, I think it'd be appropriate to certainly get the views of the sector. I say the UFU's come out this morning calling for the task force, but it definitely would be useful for us to get the views of the sector. Just members think it would be appropriate also perhaps that we highlight our concerns with DAERA. because we have heard many times that the North feeds 10 million people, and probably about 5 million of those are in Britain. So in some ways, we're in many ways the breadbasket for Britain. So I think it would be perhaps appropriate that we flagged up our concerns with there as well. What do members think of that?
Okay.
I think that would be a good idea, and even that 82% that we've been given by the CCC is based on our livestock farming, so they're very well aware that our economic over-reliance on livestock farming exists. So if they want us to sustain that, then I definitely think it's a DAERA issue to come in and start looking at the solutions to the crisis.
Yeah. Nick, can you come in there? You have enough of that? Those suggestions?
Chair, yes, indeed. And by way of update, almost live with members, have just received correspondence from departmental colleagues to advise that the request that we made to the Minister last week to provide an urgent briefing, we've just received email correspondence from colleagues to suggest that it will be officials rather than the Minister that would be in a position to brief on the rising costs of fertilisers and feed costs that we requested last week. But more than happy on the back of the discussion here this morning to return to the Minister outlining the support for the UFU's call to form an agri-food task force and to seek an urgent briefing with the Minister himself on these matters. And in addition, we will write to DEFRA to outline the committee's concerns also.
And also remind them, that the food that we produce here is actually to feed the British market. Okay. You get okay, Nick, there?
Chair, yes, indeed. Thank you.
Okay, members, thank you for that. I'm going to move on to item number 3. It's the draft minutes from last week's meeting. I wasn't at last week's meeting, so I think it was maybe the first meeting I missed since I started this role, so I may not be in a position to sign those minutes. May have to be Philip who signs it. Would that be correct, Nick?
Chair, the procedure is that it should be yourself that would sign them if the committee has agreed that they are an accurate record of the proceedings last week.
Yeah, okay, no problem. I'll be in Parliament Buildings on Monday and I'll sign them when I get there, okay? Sorry, Patsy, you have a matter arising from the minutes. Go ahead.
Chair, it's in regard to a presentation we received from NIEA last week. I've been sent a letter which has been forwarded out to some local authorities. Isn't it, the whole issue of delays in consultations and the likes, and what local authorities were considering to rectify that, and that they were going to be issuing, in circumstances where they hadn't received the consultation back in time, that they would issue an approval because of the consultation not been officially returned. Some of those were considering that. Now, a letter has gone out to local authorities advising that, in fact, they could be breaking some laws by doing that. So it might be helpful if we got an update from NIEA just as to what their stance is in regard to this, because if people are being penalised, and irrespective of what department it is, by an inability of a department to consult and to efficiently turn around consultations, and I think it would be rather unfortunate that the department then issues, how should we put it, cautionary letters to local authorities advising that they may well be breaking the law by doing so. Mm-hmm. So we can get some clarification from NIEA about that, please.
Yeah, that's noted. Yeah.
Chair, sorry to cut in and not send you a WhatsApp, Chair, sir. Just to say, I'm wondering, is it possible to get sight of that letter, Patsy?
Yeah, well, I'll check. It was given to me in confidence.
Okay, right, that's okay.
Here.
It was just out of interest
I'll
to
check
see it.
with the party himself and see is it okay to do that.
Yeah. Nick,
Thank you.
Okay, I will, Rosemary, okay?
Nick, do you want to come in that matter?
Chair, thank you. It was just to highlight in relation to Patsy's comment that we have received in correspondence this week a reply from the Department for Infrastructure in terms of the wider issues on planning, and that issue of deemed consent is raised, Patsy, so that will be discussed under correspondence later, that particular issue of whether a local authority can make a decision if a statutory consultee does not respond within the specified time frame.
Yes. Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you for that. Okay, members, we're going to move on now to item number 5. It's an oral briefing from the Department on the future agricultural policy consultation responses. You'll be aware that the Department launched its consultation on proposals for a future agricultural policy in December, and despite our request for an extension to the consultation deadline, it closed on the 15th of February. Members will also recall that we completed a position paper outlining the committee views on the proposal, which was sent to the Department on the 18th of February, and that's available on our website. I would like to welcome the following officials, invite them to brief the committee on the initial feedback from the consultations, and relevant papers are in the table pack. So I'd like to invite Dr. Rosemary Agnew, the Director of Transition Policy, Stephen Miller, the Deputy Director, and Julie Ann Moorhead, the Senior Advisor to DAERA. And if you want to give a briefing, and then members will ask questions. He's very welcome this morning.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And thank you and the committee for the opportunity to meet you this morning, really to provide an update on the responses to the consultation on future agricultural policy proposals for Northern Ireland. The committee will recall that Norman Fulton and I met with you in a closed session on the 25th of November 2021 to discuss at that stage the Department's proposals for future agricultural policy and a planned consultation to seek stakeholder views. We agreed at that meeting to provide an update on the responses at the end of the consultation period. And at this point, I would very much like to take the opportunity to thank the committee for its position paper on the proposals, and that will be very helpful as we move forward. As you said, Chair, the public consultation exercise opened for a period of 8 weeks on the 21st of December, closing on the 15th of February, and was supported by a communications plan that included a launch day notification to stakeholders across the agriculture, food and environment sectors, a series of well-attended consultation information sessions, press releases, radio interviews, advertisements in the farming press, along with an extensive social media campaign. The consultation itself, as you know, sought views on the policy proposals and not the detailed implementation design. But many relevant points were made in regard to the design of the implementation stages, and these will be taken on board as part of our future work programme. Turning then to the consultation responses themselves. The consultation sought responses to 60 individual questions and gave the opportunity also for respondents to provide views and comments as well as a direct yes/no answer. In total, 339 responses were received, with 55 of these from organisations. Chair, at this point I would like to acknowledge that we said 53 in the paper we provided to the committee, but that was an error. It should have read 55. And of these 55, 30 were from farming organisations and 11 were from environmental organisations. Of the 284 responses received from individuals, almost half identified as farmers. Overall, respondents broadly welcomed the opportunity to comment on future agricultural policy proposals and looked forward to playing an effective role in the future development of a sustainable agricultural industry. Across the majority of respondents, there was a sense of opportunity for Northern Ireland to redefine its agricultural policy and to develop a policy better suited to meet its local needs. At this point, a high-level summary of responses has been provided to the committee, and those responses are the responses received for each question. It's not intended to be a comprehensive report at this stage of every view expressed, but rather a broad summary of the key themes raised in the responses. We do intend that this summary will be published on the Department's website in the coming days in advance of providing a fuller breakdown of responses as we move forward. Responses indicated strong endorsement across the 13 work streams or the 13 policy work streams for a number of the proposals. And I want to spend a little time this morning taking you through some of the key findings in relation to each. Chair, this might take a little longer than 5 minutes, so I just ask for your forbearance just to try and work through those because I think it's important to give that outline to the committee. The first workstream was a resilience workstream or resilience measure, and the need for continuation of an income support safety net resilience payment was welcomed across all stakeholder groups, although some respondents sought clarity on when the proposed resilience payments would actually end. There was broad agreement on the proposal for progressive capping of the resilience payment above £60,000. However, the majority of respondents disagreed with the proposal to increase the minimum claim size to 10 hectares. There was a mixed response to the conditionalities proposed for the resilience payment, with respondents recognising the benefits the conditions would bring, but also identified training and knowledge as a potential barrier and some concerns about the added burden to farmers. The proposed approach to the crisis framework was viewed as positive. Turning to the proposed Heritage Sustainability Package, there was a mixed response to these proposals. Farming respondents generally supported the measure but raised significant concerns about the conditions. The majority of respondents raised concerns regarding the conditionalities of age at first calving, the calving interval of the suckler cow measure, and the age at slaughter in the beef transformation measure. A number of respondents asked for more information and raised concerns about the ability of native breeds to meet the conditions proposed, and environmental organisations raised concerns around the unintended consequences, such as overgrazing, if a heritage sustainability package was taken forward. A number of respondents highlighted the need for support for the sheep sector, and support for breeding ewes, as the committee will be aware, was not part of the heritage sustainability package that we consulted on, as the ability to use this mechanism to drive productivity and reduce carbon emissions is less obvious in relation to sheep, and the responses did not clearly identify a need. In terms of farming for nature, there was broad agreement for the introduction of a farming for nature package and to focusing that on habitat management actions as listed in the consultation documents as an initial mechanism to kickstart improved awareness and capacity to manage the environmental assets on the farm. A number of specific suggestions were received for other quick win management actions, but concerns were raised around the proposed eligibility criteria and the minimum claim size proposal. There was significant support for the test and learn pilots that were proposed as a way to introduce the Farming for Nature package. The need for low carbon emission farming practices was broadly supported. Some respondents did feel, however, that the proposals did not go far enough and that the farming industry needed to change its product mix, including a planned reduction in livestock numbers. The principle of encouraging farming of carbon as a business enterprise received broad support. In relation to proposed investment measure, there was broad support for the guidelines proposed for future capital support and to the draft design principles. On knowledge measures, the proposed approach to future knowledge and innovation received good support, with many identifying that peer learning should be a focus of delivery moving forward. Gaps in current provision around environmental challenges, carbon, water catchments, biodiversity and soil management were identified. In terms of generational renewal, there was strong support for encouraging a longer-term planning approach for farm businesses, with respondents stating that this would encourage younger entrants into the industry. There was good agreement with the proposed three-phase approach to a generational renewal programme, with respondents agreeing that the inclusion of knowledge and skills development was vitally important within any new programme. In considering the proposed supply chain measures, stakeholders indicated strong agreement that more needed to be done to create effective functioning supply chains. Majority of respondents agreed that the data from the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme will be vital in establishing a baseline across Northern Ireland, and there was good agreement that the requirement to have a nutrient management plan should be linked to the receipt of support payments moving forward. Respondents supported the proposal that government must take the necessary investment to develop a relevant and targeted livestock genetic and data programme, and the development of knowledge transfer programmes to support farmers to adopt genetic improvement technologies was necessary. Strong support for simplifying the current cross-compliance system and for the redefinition of land eligibility, although some concerns were raised around land abandonment. Respondents showed broad support for the principles around which metrics would be developed and a monitoring and evaluation programme to assess how the programme was delivering against its 4 key outcomes of increased productivity, environmental sustainability, improved resilience and supply chain integration. With strong support for the horticulture proposals, with a number of responses indicating there was significant potential to expand and grow the sector. A number of responses were received across all of the impact assessments on which we consulted, with the main theme being the need to undertake further detailed assessments as the policy proposals continued to be developed. In terms of general comments across all the responder groups, the view expressed that many of the proposals needed more detail. And as I said previously, the challenges of future implementation were highlighted, including the importance of being cognizant of other established and developing government policies, particularly those across the DAERA family. In reaching my conclusion, and thank you for your forbearance, Chair, and the extra time this morning, I hope you find this overview helpful. In terms of next steps, DAERA is completing the analysis of the consultation responses and considering the suggestions received from the consultees. This analysis will fully consider the written views as well contained within the committee's position paper, and as I said earlier, we're very grateful to receive that. The department intends, as I said, to publish this high-level overview of responses that you have received, and a fuller published summary will follow in advance of final decisions being made in respect of future agricultural policy for Northern Ireland. Officials are currently preparing recommendations for the Minister in terms of those decisions, and he will need time to consider these before any final decisions are made. But our expectation is that those decisions will be made before the pre-election period. So thank you very much, Chair and Committee, for listening to the presentation, and I and my colleagues are happy to take any questions you have, and of course we're happy to receive any further views that the Committee wishes to put forward to us following this briefing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Rosemary. It was very helpful and detailed, and thanks for the written briefing that was provided to us as well. I suppose there's a couple of bits and pieces that I'd maybe like to mention. I'm thinking there of the actual pot. Now, I know people quite rightly may well see this as an opportunity, but within the Common Agriculture Policy, when we were in it, we did have a 7-year multi-annual budget where you could actually project ahead for 7 years. The situation we're in now is that we don't know really beyond 2024. But even if the funding did continue, see under this new arrangement here, from what I can see, I don't see what would have been a Pillar 2 pot. I don't see what would have been the rural development programme. What I can see here is a lot of the proposed programmes effectively modulating money out of the new single farm payment. Now, is that not going to put severe pressure on the system? Like, for example, the headage scheme is really 17% modulation out of the what I would call the new single farm payment. So, seeing the absence of what would have been a Pillar 2 rural development programme, is there not going to be severe pressure on spreading this very, very small pot right around for all of the schemes that are mentioned in the policy?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I think it's important to recognise that the funding that we now receive from Treasury is replacement funding for both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. Mm-hmm. And I think in your finance briefings you would have received absolute detail on the amounts of that funding moving forward, but it is of the order, and please don't hold me to this, of around 312 million for the incoming financial year and 327 and 329 for the following 2 million for the following 2 financial years. So that is the EU replacement funding that Treasury have provided for us for all Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 activities. So it is out of that budget that the funding for all of these programmes will be taken forward. Obviously for 2022, and the schemes have opened, there's no change. As we move forward 2023 and 2024, subject to Ministers' decisions, these proposals could mean changes, but there will still be an area-based income support safety net We will take money from it for a headage out of the total budget, not modulating necessarily from single farm payment, but out of the total budget. And I think it's important to see it in that context. And again, you said the programme, but the programme has many measures proposed within it that would be part or would have been part of a rural development programme. You know, we look at the knowledge, for example, that's family farm key skills. There were capital investment measures within the rural development programme. So some, you know, a number of them are still contained within those proposals. And again, I just finish by saying no decisions have been taken on the way forward.
And Rosemary, obviously, I appreciate that just that the department still deliberating on the on the responses, and we were disappointed that there was an extension, and I appreciate your explanation of that. But given the fact that it was launched a couple of days before Christmas, so you had probably 2 weeks of Christmas holiday when people were doing other things. But that's not what I want to get to. It's seeing the likes of the generational renewal. You know, will we be seeing more hard suggestions of schemes coming forward? You know, this was we had International Women's Day this week, and we launched a report just 2 days ago about the vast underrepresentation of women in farming. Only 5% of principal farmers are women, and only 4% of the business development groups are women. Will we be seeing some proposals coming forward from the department and new agriculture policy to redress the issue of generation renewal, but also to redress the vast underrepresentation of women in agricultural roles?
This consultation was solely around the policy proposals to set the direction of travel. That needs to be followed up once decisions are made on those policy proposals around scheme design and consultation on that scheme design and proposals around what those schemes would do. So simple answer is absolutely yes. You will see further proposals once decisions are made. In terms of women, obviously we very much welcome sight of the committee's report, and we need to take time to consider how that might influence any of that scheme design moving forward.
And just the last thing before we move around the room is, with this future agriculture policy, would it have to go back to the executive for approval?
Currently, we have not engaged with the executive at all in terms of any of this. We have significant broad support across many of the proposals, and there is no intention at this stage to take it to the executive because it hasn't been there to date.
Yeah, so it's possible to implement this without going to the executive?
Yes, yes.
Great. Thank you very much, Rosemary. I'm going to just move around the room here now. And who have we got? Claire. Claire?
Yeah, just waiting to get brought in there. Thanks very much, guys. I'm looking at the report there, and it's saying that there's 52% of respondents disagreed that payments under the heading sustainability package being made only to businesses in receipt of payments under the resilience measures. And then in the notes on page 16, that's marked down as to say that some respondents disagreed. So I just wanted to flag that one. 52% is a majority, not some, you know, and even at the most sort of, you know, even measure, you can say the respondents were split, but, you know, I just wanted to point that out. And even going on the headage measure, again, headage will be livestock focused, and we're seeing now on how the Russian invasion of Ukraine has brought a real worrying economic and supply chain shock to the agri sector. So I'm wondering what type of, you know, when we're looking at a future agricultural policy, what level of risk assessment has been carried out, or how developed is one?
Okay. To take your first question, you know, we acknowledge that we provided a high-level summary at speed to try to keep this moving and to try to discuss with the committee. You know, the 52% is across organisations and individuals. What we are now doing is looking at what the organisations said compared to the individuals. So, you know, take your point, Claire. In terms of the risk assessment and moving forward, the whole programme obviously does have a risk assessment that within our own internal processes. Within the department, there is a programme board, and that risk assessment is reviewed at each of the meetings, which happen monthly. It the next meeting is actually on Friday, so we'll probably be updating the risk assessment in light of the circumstances in Ukraine that you've mentioned. But it is a here and now, it is in our faces, it's urgent. What we're trying to do with this policy is develop something for the future, a long-term vision for agriculture. So I think, we just need to look at each of those two things. And, we were on listening earlier whenever Chair indicated, how our livestock were important in terms of providing food for 10 million people. And obviously that's something we're very, very aware of. But at this stage, these are proposals. No decisions have been taken on how we move forward.
So does that mean, so obviously, I completely get, Rosemary, that this is in draft form and we're moving forward, but we've seen yesterday that the climate bill was passed, its final stage. So, are we formulating that policy to reflect the climate bill, to reflect sort of those global risks? I suppose, if we're so interconnected, there's the invasion of Ukraine has caused chaos to our sector here. Are those types of issues, that can be flagged up there? It's not rocket science. It's not waiting until they happen and then say, oh my God, that's happening and we're meeting weekly to do that. Things need to be future-proofed. So that's the level of risk assessment that I'm looking at. So is the policy going to be tied into the bill, and is risk assessment going to be measured in terms of the rollout and the interconnectedness?
Absolutely, Claire, and you'll note in the actual consultation document itself, we actually indicated very clearly in terms of the climate bill that agriculture needed to make its fair contribution as we moved forward to whatever the legislation that was put into place. We weren't specific, and we have identified a number of, shall I say, fairly quick wins in terms of carbon reduction actions that all farmers could take now if we decide to move forward with those. And those will be monitored and evaluated and reviewed as we move forward. That's part of our plan to make sure that we are future-proofing against anything that happens in a global context, or indeed at a legislative basis within Northern Ireland. I'll perhaps ask my colleague Stephen Miller if he wants to add anything additional on the Ukraine issue, but it'll just be very high level. Stephen, if there's anything you wish to add at this point.
Yes, Rosemary, thanks. No, again, listening to the Chair's opening remarks, I was taking note of all of that, and certainly we are very closely monitoring the situation. We're in very close contact with our colleagues in DAERA, and we actually had a stakeholder meeting yesterday, Wednesday, and took the views of people there, and that will be followed up again next week with ongoing meetings. So we are taking very close account of what's happening there and the impacts it's going to have on our local sectors here.
Great. And is there anything, just last one, sorry, Chair, is there anything that you foresee? Obviously that's happening right now, but is there anything that you have even been able to assess as maybe a red flag or something worth keeping an eye on in terms of potentially impacting the sector in the future along those lines? I'm really thinking in line to the bill and the real impact and ramifications of climate change that's happening. So what are the real risks to our sector and how we're trying to future-proof them?
Okay. Maybe
carbon's one thing, but supply chains is going to be huge.
Okay, maybe I'll address the carbon one, and Stephen, if you might address the supply chain one. So, okay. In terms of particularly the amendment that was made to the climate change bill in relation to reduction of methane, we have proposed a number of actions around reducing methane for livestock in Northern Ireland, and one of those is particularly around feed additives and the use of feed additives. Now, we recognise that the cost of feed is increasing and spiralling currently, and if a specific additive is added to that feed, that will add cost to that. So one of the proposals was about DAERA incentivising the use or the cost of that, adding that feed additive to the concentrate rations or the diets of ruminant animals to reduce methane. So that's one of the proposals contained within the document. And now we're looking, based on the climate change bill that was approved or agreed yesterday, how we might amend that and what priority we might put to that in terms of our recommendations to the Minister. So I think, Claire, hopefully that reassures you that we're addressing the issues that have been brought forward recently around climate change. And maybe, Stephen, if you might comment on supply chain issues.
Again, just what was the comment on supply chain issues, Claire? I didn't quite pick it up.
Have you been able to identify any future potential sort of threats or red flags to supply chain issues for our sector? You know, we're talking about Ukraine at the minute, and I know that Rosemary's saying that you're meeting weekly and keeping an eye on it, you know, but is there anything that you're within the department that has been flagged up, even with working with DAERA, that has been flagged up as a potential that we need to keep an eye on in the near future as future risks?
Yeah, well, I think as we all know, supply chains are extremely complex and everybody relies on everybody else. So any movement anywhere can have a knock-on effect, and it's sometimes trying to predict where that knock-on effect will come out at the other end. So I think it's quite obvious that the biggest impacts are going to be around energy and all of the uses that that energy is put to, making fertilizer, fuel for tractors and so on. The feed impacts are going to be quite critical as well. We're not so dependent on Russian or Ukrainian grain here in the UK, but other people may well be buying the stuff that we currently buy, and therefore that will have the domino effect and how it will impact on us. So it's just trying to see where some of these things come out in the wash, so to speak. But we are certainly very aware of it. We're keeping a very close eye on it. We're talking regularly to the people in the grain trade and so on, just to try and establish where the problems will be.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Okay, thank you. We've got Harry. Harry?
Okay, Chair, thank you very much. That was very similar to Claire's there, because that's what's in our heads at the minute. Rosemary, with the dreadful happenings in Ukraine going on at present, and the huge future implications for that country and its people, I was going to ask you, would the people or would the policy need to take this into consideration as we move forward, as it will eventually, and it's already affecting us here? But I think you've pretty much answered it. But the main thing is that the policy is fluid, and going forward that it is adaptable as the needs arise. Did you say that it was fluid? Yep, thank you.
Yes, absolutely, Harry. It is fluid. We will monitor and evaluate. We will review as we move forward. But again, you know, as I said, and to a number of comments, no decisions are made at the minute. These are proposals, and these are long-term proposals, as I said at the beginning. And we all hope that, you know, Ukraine, what's happening in Ukraine is terrible at the minute. But it is urgent. It's what we deal with now. We don't know what's coming as we move forward, so it's absolutely vital that our future agricultural policy can be reviewed to meet our needs, and that's the whole key around having local control over it.
And I suppose there's no way in the policy we'll have it meeting our needs, but it'd be difficult to meet the needs of the people out there, wouldn't it? Like, because we don't really stretch that far. It'd be nice to, but it's not something in this policy. Yep. Okay. Yep. Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair.
No problem. William?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and can I thank you, ladies and those, for the presentation. In relation to the consultation responses, when is it hoped that any new policy will come into effect? It'll not be for this 2022 scheme year, I wouldn't have thought.
William, no, 2022 scheme year has already opened on the 1st of March, and it's the same schemes as the 2021 year. We don't envisage at this stage, again subject to decisions, but we don't envisage any change to 2023, other than perhaps some small pilots. But those could be challenging in the circumstances, particularly around Ukraine. We would envisage that the rollout might be from the beginning of 2024, but that is still to be decided.
And there was some concern in relation to currently an active farm stands at 3 hectares, and that one proposal was to increase that to 10 hectares. That would rule out something in the region, I'm told, of 4,000 farms. So I'm told that there would be, I'm sure in the consultations, quite a bit of response in relation to that, I would have thought.
William, absolutely. I think that was one of the areas where we received most negative comments, and the very significant proportion of respondents were against increasing the minimum claim size to 10 hectares. But you will be aware that in our background documentation, we provided information on what would happen if we increased that minimum claim size from 3 hectares to 5 hectares to 7.5 hectares to 10 hectares. And I acknowledge that the committee's position paper included reference to that detail. But this is obviously something now that Minister Poots will need to consider and make decisions on that particular matter.
Okay, in relation to, you said earlier there that in 22 scheme years 312 million, 23 scheme years 327 million, and 24 329 million. Do you see that as keeping broadly in line with what we would have been getting from Europe if we'd have still remained in Europe?
I think the devil is probably in the detail, but broadly in line. Treasury will argue that maintains the level of funding, as the Conservative manifesto had indicated, and it subtracts the tails of the ongoing RDP funding, which will roll out to 2023. So the ceiling for it is £330 million, subtracting the tails. So it's broadly what we would have received had we been remained in the EU for Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, as I indicated to the Chair earlier.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Rosemary Barton. Rosemary, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, the other Rosemary. Just one of the interesting things that came up in the consultation was intensification of beef. Surely now, trying to finish beef off earlier, and that would result in beef being less dependent on grass and more dependent on concentrates to finish off earlier. Surely that is a retrograde step rather than a forward-thinking step in relation to climate change policy.
Okay, Rosemary, again, I go back. These were proposals aimed at delivering increased productivity and better environmental sustainability. We do have significant evidence which shows that the earlier finishing of beef cattle does reduce carbon emissions over the lifetime, but I take your point that if it results in increased concentrate feeding, it may have negative climate change consequences, and that could be one of the unintended consequences, and indeed many of the respondents mentioned that. But those were proposals. What we're doing now as officials is obviously looking through those consultation responses, undertaking further analysis before we would put recommendations to the Minister on that, and then it will be a decision for the Minister on the basis of further analysis that we are currently undertaking.
Okay. One other thing, you spoke earlier on about pilots, perhaps in 2023 it is. Can you sort of give us a little bit more detail, perhaps in relation to these test and learn pilots, in relation to maybe farming for nature, etc. packages?
In truth, Rosemary, probably not yet, other than we proposed within the consultation document that we needed to have a farming for nature or agri-environment schemes that were scalable, that were deliverable at landscape scale across Northern Ireland and provided connectivity of habitats. How exactly we can deliver that is really the question. So we may need pilots looking at how we can implement and deliver such a scheme, and that's probably where we would go. But we will need further consultation and further engagement, particularly with some of the environmental and farming organisations around how that could be implemented and delivered. And that's the kind of pilots that we're looking for. And linked to those pilots, how we transition from the current environmental farming scheme to a new Farming for Nature scheme, because obviously the environmental farming scheme was part of the rural development programme, and the funding for that, etc., and the phasing and the transition to a new agri-environment scheme is part of what we might need to look at in some pilot areas. But further detail on that will be forthcoming in due course when decisions are made.
Sorry, I was sneezing there.
All
yeah.
right.
Okay. So basically, that it's going to take you some time before you get that underway. Final question. Sort of, I was thinking about. Have you had much engagement in relation to the market monitoring group? To scope out what is projecting in terms of market disruption.
Okay. The market monitoring group meets very regularly, and I believe Stephen Miller attends most of those meetings. So I'm going to ask Stephen if he'd like to comment on the market monitoring group. Stephen.
Okay, thanks, Rosemary. Yes, I attend that market monitoring group. It meets fortnightly, looking at the trends and the various impacts, movements in the market, and so on. And that engagement will continue as we develop from these proposals into recommendations and then into schemes. So to answer your question, yes, it will be taken account of, but we're not there yet. We haven't actually made any decisions about exactly what we're going to deliver. So therefore, it's a sort of a chicken and egg, but it will be taken into account.
Yeah, so it's going to take you time to get that organised?
Well, it will take time to implement new programmes. And as they're being implemented, then any market signals will be taken on board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I've no other members down here. Rosemary, I knew that there were two Rosemarys on the line. No, I just wanted to clarify something there. You mentioned earlier on about tails minus the tails. Is those tails that you're referring to, is that the 34 million that we had in the rural development programme, but which we're not allowed to carry over into the new rural development programme as a consequence of leaving Brexit? Is it 34 million?
Yes.
That's the tails you're referring to?
Yeah, that's the tails I'm referring to. Yes, that's absolutely it. Now, I'm not sure if it's still 34 million. We'd need perhaps to clarify that and take that away and clarify. But it was the original 34 million. That's the tails I'm referring to.
Under the N+3 formula, had we remained in the EU, we could have carried that over.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
the new World Development Programme. Right.
Yes,
Thank you, Rosemary. Okay, folks, thank you very much for that briefing this morning. It was great to see you as always, Rosemary, Stephen, and Julianne. And no doubt, as you continue your analysis of the future policy and we get more details and more proposals coming through, I'm sure we'll be seeing you again. Although we've only got 2 meetings left, right enough, so we might see you again, we might not. But thank you all very much. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Right. Bye now. Bye.
Bye. Okay,
members, we're moving on now to item number 6. Item number 6, it's the Avian Influenza outbreak update. You'll be aware that we continue to keep a close eye on the situation in relation to avian influenza, and we asked the department to provide a monthly update on the case numbers and any matters of concern. Following our last update on the 10th of February, we wrote to the department for further information on the proximity between the most recent outbreaks and whether there are any links between the two. The department responded on page 21 of our packs to advise that the cases were recorded approximately 50 miles apart and investigations are currently ongoing in relation to tracing the outbreaks. However, it is believed that 5 of the outbreaks are connected to infected wild birds, whilst one appears to be by cross-contamination from an infected flock. An updated briefing by the department is in your packs at page 17. And I'd like to welcome back to the committee Jim Blee, the Deputy Director of Animal Health and Welfare of DAERA, Julian Henderson, Senior Principal Veterinary Officer, and Gemma Daly, Senior Principal Veterinary Officer, DAERA. I'd like to use to provide an update, and then members may want to ask questions thereafter. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just checking you can hear me okay, because I'm at a new location today.
Yeah, I can anyway. All the members okay? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Good morning to you, and members of the committee. I would like to thank you for this opportunity to update you today on the current avian influenza outbreak across the United Kingdom and Republic of Ireland, and the development since our last appearance on the 10th of February 2022. As you've mentioned, Chair, I'm joined today by Senior Principal Veterinary Officers Julian Henderson and Gemma Daly, who along with myself will answer any questions committee members may have. You'll be aware that an avian influenza prevention zone has been in place across Northern Ireland since the 17th of November last year. In addition, a mandatory housing order was introduced on Monday the 29th of November. This further disease prevention measure legally requires birds to be housed or otherwise kept separate from wild birds. Similar housing orders are also in place across Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland. Both these measures remain in place and will continue to be until the risk of a further avian influenza incursion reduces. The latest Northern Ireland veterinary risk assessment concludes that the risk of a high-path avian influenza incursion to a domestic poultry flock in Northern Ireland remains moderate, with biosecurity at individual flock level being of critical importance. Veterinary officials will continue to keep these measures under regular review in collaboration with our colleagues across Great Britain, the Republic of Ireland, and with industry stakeholders. As of today, the UK is on day 135 of this outbreak. To date, 94 cases have been confirmed across Great Britain since the first case was confirmed in England on the 26th of October 2021. There have been no cases confirmed across Great Britain in the last week. However, there are a small number of report cases being investigated. To note, when my colleague Neil Garton last addressed the committee on the 10th of February 2022, confirmed cases across Great Britain stood at 86. This clearly indicates that the pace of this outbreak is easing. However, caution should be taken in relation to these figures. The Republic of Ireland, as of today, has had 6 confirmed cases, 5 in County Monaghan and 1 in County Cavan. The disease control zones for 4 of these cases extended into Northern Ireland. These disease control zones have now all been lifted. Across Northern Ireland, as of today, there have been 6 confirmed cases. These cases were in Bruckshean, Auchnacloy, Armagh, Coke, Ballinderry, and most recently in Enniskillen. All disease control zones enacted around the first 5 affected premises have been lifted following extensive surveillance across the zones. Preliminary cleansing and disinfection was completed at the affected premises in Enniskillen on the 7th of February, with the 3-kilometre protection zone merging with a 10-kilometre surveillance zone on the 1st of March. The subsequent lifting of the 10-kilometre surveillance zone will take place today, timely for our meeting on the 10th of March, following the completion of the surveillance activity required. That means that all zones on the island of Ireland will be lifted as of 3:30 today. A detailed breakdown of costs associated with this current ongoing outbreak is not available at this stage. However, compensation has now been agreed for all 6 infected premises, totalling approximately £790,000. Additionally, to date, approximately £190,000 has been spent on hiring of equipment, culling, disposal, and preliminary cleansing and disinfection. It should be noted that this figure does not include staff costs, including overtime. Furthermore, secondary or final cleansing and disinfection costs totaling £167,000 approximately have been agreed for 4 of the 6 sites, and 2 sites remain to be agreed. In relation to recovery and restocking can commence 21 days after final cleansing and disinfection, or 3 months after preliminary cleansing and disinfection, subject to a veterinary risk assessment. DAERA officials continue to engage with affected flock keepers to discuss next steps for their premises, including the timelines for restocking. Officials are also working closely with AFBI to ensure effective planning and coordination of the sampling requirements for the restocking of infected premises. Stakeholder engagement remains frequent, and excellent relationships have been built with the industry here in Northern Ireland. DAERA wish to thank industry for their willingness to attend meetings on a frequent basis and often at short notice to discuss issues, and for the support that industry has provided in response to this disease outbreak. In relation to the free-range status of eggs from birds that are compulsory housed for disease control measures, the legislation allows that eggs may continue to be marketed as free-range for the duration of a housing restriction, but not for more than 16 weeks. Since the housing restriction was introduced on the 29th of November last year, this would mean the 16-week derogation will end on Sunday, the 20th of March 2022. From this point on, eggs produced from free-range flocks must be marketed as barn eggs. It is now inevitable that the housing restriction will remain in place beyond this derogation date. In preparation for the potential expiration of this derogation, the Minister wrote to DEFRA Secretary of State George Eustace on the 4th of January this year, asking that due to the potential cost for the Northern Ireland egg industry, that the 4 UK administrations work together with industry to develop mitigations. It is recognised that there may be difficulty experienced by egg packing centres in securing packaging that will meet the current regulations if eggs need to be marketed as barn eggs. This will likely entail an overlay label on the pack and a stamp on the egg to indicate barn production. In addition, appropriate point-of-sale signage at retail establishments and for online shopping will be required to inform the purchaser. Meetings have been held between DEFRA, the devolved administrations and industry over the past few months, the most recent being held yesterday, to discuss solutions to deliver over-labelling of free-range eggs to clearly indicate their status as barn eggs. Egg marketing colleagues are meeting with the Northern Ireland egg industry today to provide an update from yesterday's meeting. We are now in the recovery phase of this outbreak, and an important part of the recovery phase is lessons learned. There are 2 aspects to lessons learned, and the first is the real-time outbreak response improvements made and continuing to be made by the department during this outbreak. The second are medium-term lessons learned, which will be undertaken by all jurisdictions once the outbreak is over. With regards to the real-time outbreak response, improvements have included the development of a dedicated online AI hub, which has improved signposting to the latest information, including ease of access to the DAERA Influenza Map Viewer and the downloadable biosecurity checklist. Development also continues of a digital licensing app for the efficient processing of licenses for the movement of birds or poultry products from and within disease control zones. New communications and messaging aimed at backyard flock keepers to reaffirm the importance of biosecurity to prevent disease incursion have been shared with Northern Ireland libraries, DAERA direct offices and departmental accommodation across the NICS government estate for display on plasma screens, and we thank all parts of the public sector for their support in that. In addition, DAERA has commissioned a series of coping with the pressures of farming workshops, focusing on the poultry sector in conjunction with rural support. They focus on recognising the symptoms of excessive stress, exploring ways to build resilience and develop strong mental fitness, and learning how to access specialist support. These workshops, which are focused on the poultry sector, are being delivered at no cost to the participant, both online and in person. They started on Thursday, the 24th of February, and will run until Wednesday, the 16th of March. And feedback from sessions that have taken place has been very good. The second stage of lessons learned is medium term, which will be undertaken by all jurisdictions once the outbreak is over. Although this outbreak is still live, DAERA has already begun assessing the response to this outbreak, which was earlier and more intensive than we have seen before. And we will use the lessons learned to strengthen the response to future outbreaks. For example, we will be critically reviewing our resourcing requirements, including building staff resilience, our operational readiness to deal with the additional demands of an outbreak, including on-the-ground monitoring and fieldwork, building on our current successful communications, including the timing of these in relation to good biosecurity, and improved communications to backyard flock keepers. We will work closely with industry in Northern Ireland and with our colleagues in the devolved administrations on a comprehensive lessons learned project, which was initiated by colleagues in APHA yesterday, and of which I and others from the department sit on the project board. Chair, thank you for your time, and we are happy to take any questions that members may have today.
Thank you very much for that there. Just on the topic of the compensation, so there was 790,000. Has that been distributed now? Has been paid out? Because I'm conscious of the economic impact this issue has on the farmers impacted.
So I can maybe let Gemma pick up on that point, if Gemma does mind.
Yes, Jim, no problem. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you can, Gemma. Yeah.
Good this time. Yes, Chair. Yes, they've all been processed, and I know the final two were processed at the start of this week, so they've finished on our side. So hopefully payment should be through now at the end of this week. The remaining two.
That's perfect. Thank you for that, Gemma. Harry?
Yep, thank you very much, Chair. Yep, appreciate it. And thank you, Jim and Gemma. Jim, I'm just wondering, is avian flu in any way seasonal? And as we move into summer, are we then in a better place with less risk?
So I'll maybe bring Gillian or Gemma in this as well too. But I think what we've seen in previous years, Harry, is that this virus is arriving with the migratory wild birds who come to overwinter across sort of northern Europe and the British Isles. But that's from an unscientific perspective, and I'll bring in the technical experts to maybe further embellish that. Gillian, perhaps.
Thank you, Jim.
Oh, yeah, well, I'll kick off. Jim, can you hear me?
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah. I think my camera's not working, but apologies for that. So this is an influenza virus, a bit like a human influenza virus, and just like a human influenza virus, it does not persist in the environment so well whenever the temperature warms up a bit. It persists in the environment much better whenever it is cooled. And in addition, a lot of the host species which carry the virus and perpetuate it in the environment, the migratory birds, disappear during the summer. We can't wait for them to go, to be honest. And that will reduce the chance of it spreading from the native bird populations or to poultry. So yeah, absolutely. The risk is likely to decrease very soon, and that is why we will be able to reduce the protection measures and the housing order that is currently in place as the risk diminishes in the environment. But of course, we look forward to next winter, which is not too far away, and we'll be promoting a message of good biosecurity and trying to influence the whole industry, both the commercial and the backyard sectors, to ensure that there is a good state of readiness out there, and also within DAERA to cope with whatever comes next year.
Very good answers, yeah, and that moves on to the next. So you're telling we can teach people to be more cautious, and the readiness is there. That's brilliant. And did you say, Jim, that 3:30 today the restrictions would be all lifted here in Northern Ireland?
So, Jeff, sorry, just to clarify, Harry. So this is around the disease control zones that are put in place around an infected premises. So that's your 3K and 10K. We had got to a stage where all disease control zones were lifted, and I can't remember the date, but then unfortunately we had a sixth outbreak in Enniskillen, which required the introduction of a 3K and 10K around it. That 10K zone will be lifted today at 3:25, I believe, and we've sent our messages out to all our stakeholders just there now while I've been on this call, and that will again get us to a position where there are no disease control zones in Northern Ireland or indeed on the island of Ireland.
Brilliant, very good. Thank you
very
much.
Just to stress, Harry, just again for the record, probably that the avian influenza prevention zone and the housing order remain in place, so those restrictions remain in place. Just in case there's any confusion. Sorry.
No, perfect. That's great. Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. John. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Just waiting to get logged in there. Chair, can I thank Jim and Gemma and Gillian for the presentation and the information, which is more positive than it was a while ago, it would appear. But one of the issues that arose at an earlier point was the issue of consultation with other bodies, including and especially councils, and the processes in place for liaison, for actions, closing parks, for example, was one of the things we discussed previously. Has there been a more full review of those processes to ensure swift action for any similar outbreak in the future, whatever the origins of that outbreak?
Yep, thanks, John. I can take that. And yes, we acknowledge that that there was to be lessons learned in relation to that, both from engaging with the councils and engaging with the wider public sector. And we have built up a network of contacts now. It's been facilitated by the Belfast Emergency Planning Committee. I think that's the right term. And they've been very, very helpful in ensuring that we have the right contacts. So for any future outbreaks, it will be one of our first ports of call as well is to consult with all public bodies to ensure that they have the latest information at the earliest possible opportunity, and we would remain available to provide advice. Of course, when it comes to the closing of facilities and stuff, those decisions will rest with the appropriate statutory body based on their risk assessments. But we will remain available and ready, and acknowledge the need to engage early with all public bodies.
Jim, thanks for that. I think you've answered this already, but just to check, the conversation with the Belfast Emergency Planning Structure, I'm assuming that could be used as a template then to be rolled out to other areas also?
My colleague, and I can't remember her name now, sorry, my colleague in Belfast is been as a single point of contact for all the councils and facilitated in bringing them together, which we're very grateful for.
That's useful. Thank you.
Okay, William.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and can I thank the gentleman for the presentation. I think it's welcome that it seems that we've got on top of the issue. In relation to the outbreak, there seemed to be quite some distance apart, Londonderry, my constituency. Would it look like wild birds were the issue in relation to the outbreaks?
So I can maybe hand over to Gillian for this one, if that's okay,
yeah.
William.
Yeah, that's fine, Jim. Yeah, I think the distribution here is mirrored right across the British Isles, where the outbreaks were completely widespread, and there's evidence that there was just extensive environmental contamination. We have very little evidence, particularly in Northern Ireland, of transmission within any particular structure. We are still looking at the scientific evidence to absolutely prove a link between two of our outbreaks. But in general, the biosecurity measures that were put in place by the industry have proved extremely effective in limiting spread, business to business spread. So yeah, we believe that the primary route of infection was environmental contamination from wild birds.
Yeah, it would look that way to me, and I'm not the expert. Yeah, no, that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you. Just to say, you spoke about environmental contamination. Would it be your thoughts then that the incidence of this bird influenza south of the border in Monaghan and Cavan could have resulted basically in wild birds bringing it across the border?
I'll take that one, Jim.
Rosemary,
I don't think we can. I don't think we can attribute the blame to wild birds in any particular territory. Those wild birds migrate and move very widely across Western Europe after their arrival from their summer pasture. So the birds coming here could have come from the south, could have come from England, could have come from Holland. They're just migrating wild birds, and yeah, of course, we're closer to the outbreaks in the south, and infection is going to be common in the bird populations north and south. I don't think the birds make any distinction because of the border.
No, I'm not suggesting that. What I'm trying to say is, do you believe the infections on the border in the Republic were connected to the infections along the border in Northern Ireland.
We have no proof of that.
No proof, yeah. Okay.
I think just to add one point to that, Rosemary, the area in the Republic of Ireland is quite a poultry dense area, sort of Monaghan Cavan area, and obviously where you have a proliferation of flocks, the risk is higher, obviously, for lapses in biosecurity. And again, that remains the most important point in all of this. The migratory birds will come and they will bring the virus. This is about biosecurity at individual flock level being the key protection measure for all flock keepers across these islands.
And you say these migratory birds bring the virus. What's the most prevalent time of the year then that flocks could pick up this virus? Is it around December, November time?
So, go ahead, Julian. Well, I'll try and start, and then I'll start. This is a bit about the bird migratory patterns, and it probably isn't around. We can track this virus across sort of Europe from sort of late September, early October. I mean, we most definitely seen this coming, similar to the human pandemic. We most definitely from our horizon scanning, both here and in the UK, could see this virus coming right across sort of Northern Europe into Great Britain, and then into the island of Ireland. So it's probably from sort of mid-October that risk period starts, and that sort of gives us a point to work back from, Rosemary, where we need to be communicating and ensuring people are aware of the measures that are necessary to protect their flocks. I don't know if you want to add anything, Julian or Gemma.
No, that absolutely it. It just depends when the migratory birds get here, and whenever there's a concentration of them sufficient for spread within their populations, that just increases the viral load in the environment. So there's no particular date. It's just whenever there's enough wild birds there and infected ones to cause a risk.
Thank you.
Yeah, late autumn, early winter.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay, as we have no other members down to ask any questions, I want to take the opportunity to thank yourselves, Jim, Julian and Gemma, for coming here this morning, giving us your presentation and update and taking our questions. So I want to wish you all the best and thank you very much for attending.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the opportunities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we're going to move on now to item number 7. That's the common frameworks. As a page 23 of your pack is a research paper by colleagues in RAISE. It's an overview of the 5 key common frameworks which the committee has identified as being of high priority, namely agri support, fisheries, animal and health welfare, chemicals and pesticides and plant health. I'd like to welcome Susie and Mark back to the committee to begin by thanking you both for providing this very helpful and insightful paper, and it is very helpful for the committee in enabling our scrutiny of the framework. So if Susie and Mark, if you want to just kick off there, and then members will ask questions once you finish your briefing.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Thank you very much. Yes, so we're just going to refer to the paper that's provided on page 23 of your packs. And both myself and Mark, we really just focused on those 5 priority common frameworks that were identified by the committee. So the paper just really gives the general and common observations across these 5 CFs, and it also provides some more specific ones at the end of the paper, but for now really we'll just focus on those common observations. So the first section just gives a bit of background of what CFs are, and I know the committee has looked at this quite a bit previously, so I'll not spend too much time on this, but really one of the main sort of observations from this is that common frameworks are described as providing for more common standards and approaches across the UK, but what we're seeing recently now is this more of an emphasis on management of divergence and its impacts across the UK. Some initial points really to consider when looking at the CFs are the 3 underpinning principles, and these are listed in this section as well. And really whether the CFs adhere to these and whether you feel that they adhere to them in a satisfactory way. So some areas are shown in this respect in the blue box, mainly in relation to divergence and the impacts, and then the specific and unique circumstances here in Northern Ireland, and whether that has an impact on adhering to these three underpinning principles. So this is discussed in a bit more detail throughout the paper. For now, I'll just hand over to Mark, and he'll take you through the next couple of sections.
Thank you, Susie, and thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. And just on page 28 of your pack, we have included there a bit of a summary, almost a brief comparative summary of the main features of the 5 prioritised common frameworks. I should say the information in those bullet points are drawn from the table, which is in Appendix 1, which took us a bit of time to put together, but I suppose we tried to give a flavour of that. In terms of flavour, 4 of the 5 priority CFs are based on outline agreements and concordats, whilst the Fisheries Management CF is based on an outline agreement and an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding. All 5, it has to be said, do contain broadly similar information in terms of headline themes, but I would have to say there is diversity in how that information is presented, and that has made a direct side-by-side comparison challenging for us, I have to say. All 5, as Susie has mentioned, the principles, and all 5 claim to reflect and adhere to the principles which were established by that Joint Ministerial Committee and the communiqué on which it was issued. All 5 also take account of and operate in a legislative environment, but do contain non-legislative elements. Now, that distinction is potentially maybe more nuanced than clear-cut, and it is this language around, is it a legislative or a non-legislative framework? We find it quite hard to disinterrogate what it actually could mean, because there are, I say, those different elements which combine. All 5, has to be said to also indicate that they have foundational principles that underpin their operation, but there is some variation within the frameworks in terms of those principles. There are linkages to other specific CFs that are referenced in 4 of the 5, the Fisheries Management CF being the one exception which makes no specific reference to other common frameworks. But I have to say, through reading it, it's almost inevitable that there could well be an impact in other areas. The number and type of decision-making across all 5 frameworks also varies considerably. And while some of the frameworks have fora which existed previously, others effectively are based upon new fora and decision-making fora. Also has to be said, in terms of decision-making, dispute resolution mechanisms are built into all of the frameworks, and indeed those involve ministers and officials at various stages. Decisions are largely, it seems, made at civil servant level with ministerial approval. I have to say, one of the things, and Susie will come on to later, there is, across all 5 common frameworks, however, a lack of detail around how parliamentary scrutiny or stakeholder involvement could be facilitated moving forward. Because I think that's the important thing to realise here. These are live documents. This isn't an exercise which is completed. They are live and they will continue to evolve. I have to say too, all of the frameworks have integral monitoring and review steps. There is some variation in the timing of those actions across frameworks, but their presence does again emphasise the fact that the documents are live, the common frameworks are live, the process is live, and will continue to evolve as they operate. I just very briefly then want to turn to some general issues that we picked up in relation to all 5 prioritised frameworks. The first one being, and I've set this out on page 29 in your pack, the Brexit Freedoms Bill. Members will undoubtedly be aware that on the end of January, the government formally announced their intention to introduce a so-called Brexit Freedoms Bill. I have to say at this point there remains a lack of detail on the specific contents of the bill, but the government announcement did include the following commitment, and I quote, The bill will make it easier to amend or remove outdated retained EU law, legacy EU law kept in the statute book after Brexit as a bridging measure, and will accompany a major cross-government drive to reform, repeal and replace outdated EU law. And I suppose within the context of all of these CFs operating under retained EU law in a large number of policy areas, there are a number of things that you might want to consider. Firstly, when will the Brexit Freedoms Bill actually be published, and when is it likely to come into effect? Secondly, does the government have an actual list of retained EU law which it is identified as being outdated and in need of reform, repeal or replacement? And I think it's also critical to know what criteria have been used or will be used in that assessment. I think turning to our own particular issues too, is if such a list does exist, how much of the law identified within it falls within the remit of the 5 prioritised CFs identified by yourselves in the DAERA committee? Furthermore, how does any such list compare to the EU legislation contained in Annex 2 of the Northern Ireland Protocol? Has there been or will there be any impact assessment of the Brexit Freedoms Bill in relation to the operation of UK CFs? And will the Brexit Freedoms Bill actually speed up the process of legislative divergence between Northern Ireland and GB? And I think critical, if there is any change in the speed of divergence as well, is does that actually even call into doubt the whole Common Frameworks process? Conversely, could this actually significantly increase the issues that the Common Frameworks process is designed to deal with, especially in relation to decision making and dispute resolution processes? I have then on pages 30 to 31 just give you some very specific Belfast Good Friday Agreement considerations in relation to the CFs. The first one on page 30 is really just around decision-making procedures. And I suppose in summary, what I'm referring to here is the decision-making powers of the DAERA Minister to either endorse an agreed proposal made by decision-making fora or to oppose a decision and trigger the dispute resolution process. I suppose all of this is really playing out within the context, and you will be well aware, and I don't want to fixate, it's not an SPS issue, it's just effectively the mechanism at the minute which is subject to judicial review, I think on our full judicial review now on the 6th of May, which was a decision by Minister Poots to suspend SPS checks at the ports, which was subsequently a judge issued an interim order suspending that decision. It's subject to judicial review, but I suppose the issue being that whilst we have not seen the legal advice that Minister Poots acted on, there was extensive media commentary that his motivation was driven by the fact that he believed he required executive approval for the checks because they were cross-cutting and contentious. And I suppose this really relates to the ministerial code and the powers that a minister has in those decisions which are required to be referred to the executive committee. So in effect, the reason I have included this is that in very pointed terms, depending on the outcome of this court case, which is forthcoming, could have a major bearing in terms of what that decides, but there are things to think about. Would any of the decisions, for example, made under the CFs that involved local ministers, and I think I'm really talking here about most specifically those would lead to regulatory divergence between GB and NI, meet the criteria of decisions that would require executive committee approval? And secondly, if executive committee approval was required, how would this affect the ability of a DAERA minister to be involved in either the decision making or dispute resolution processes set out within each of the 5 CFs? Secondly, and you're well aware of the circumstance at the minute, the current lack of an executive does raise some potential questions moving forward in terms of the operation of the 5 CFs. Firstly, where local ministerial agreement or endorsement is required in relation to a decision around potential regulatory divergence and subsequent implementation of the same, what happens when there is no DAERA minister in post? Can implementation occur based on the approval by officials alone? And if not, what happens? Secondly, what impact could the lack of a local DAERA minister have on the potential to trigger the dispute resolution processes built into each of the prioritised CFs? How likely would civil servants be to trigger the dispute resolution mechanism without ministerial approval or cover? Thirdly, what impact could the lack of a local DAERA minister have on the operation of the dispute resolution process, particularly where a dispute reached interministerial group Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, EFRA level? And in effect, I suppose what I'm saying is who would ensure that Northern Ireland had a voice so that our perspective was heard at that level? Is there any provision for that eventuality? And if a dispute progressed beyond IMG-EFRA to intergovernmental relations level, who again would represent Northern Ireland's interests and how? And that leads me on just my final point before I will hand back to Susie, which is around this dispute resolution, intergovernmental relations process, which is set out on page 32 in your pack. I think I have to emphasise that the emphasis across all the frameworks is to avoid or resolve disputes quickly. But there is a recognition that this may not always be possible. And indeed, that's reflected in the fact that all 5 of the CFs have mechanisms for dispute escalation and resolution. There is some variation at the lower levels of dispute resolution, but the higher up the chain you go, the more common the approach. And the upper end is, I suppose, dominated by this IGR process. Now, all of the common frameworks were written at various points, so they may use different language slightly, but they are all pointing towards this intergovernmental relations process, which forms the basis of the UK's devolution settlement. There was a review that has been undertaken of those processes in recent years, and the conclusions, which were accepted by all parties, were published in January 2022. And those now provide the architecture for disputes, including those identified through the Common Frameworks process, to be resolved. That process, that IGR process, is really too complex for a rigorous assessment here and now, but I would draw your attention to the fact that it's premised on a 3-tier decision-making structure, with the Prime Minister and the heads of the devolved government's council at its summit. The significant thing to note here is that an issue that escalates to that level, so it's the Prime Minister and the heads of the devolved governments, is not guaranteed to be resolved. And indeed, I've included the quote there in paragraph 11 of Annex D within the actual document. And I read, if governments reach a stage in the process where they are unable to reach a resolution and progress the dispute further, each government must make a statement to their respective legislators setting out the circumstances for the failure to reach a solution. So from that process, there's a number of questions. How likely is it that a common frameworks dispute could actually reach council level within the IGR process? Do DAERA officials have any sense as to how often this could occur, particularly in relation to these 5 prioritised CFs? Is there any potential for the use of dispute resolution mechanism or dispute resolution process to become busier as divergence between GB and NI and potentially numerous policy areas potentially increases? Is the IGR and wider dispute resolution process adequately resourced to deal with a growing caseload? And finally, and I think this is the crucial one, what happens next if governments fail to reach a solution at council level? Will agreeing to disagree be realistically possible on operational matters tied to CFs? Will such an outcome not even have the potential for operational paralysis in relation to a number of the frameworks? And I suppose we ask those questions. And without further ado, then I will hand back to Susie to take you back to the rest. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so I'll just move on to section 4.4, which covers the protocol. So really, as we've discussed before, one of the key drivers of the CF process is to ensure this common approach is maintained across the UK. However, the degree to which a CF applies to Northern Ireland is certainly influenced by the protocol. And within this respect, the protocol may mean that a CF could, or elements of a CF, could be GB-wide in its scope, so across England, Scotland and Wales, while then Northern Ireland would adhere to the EU. And an example of this really is, for instance, the Chemicals and Pesticides Common Framework. So it's mostly GB-wide in scope because most of the legislation listed is also covered under the protocol, apart from the sustainable use of pesticides, and it's not under the protocol. So within just this one area, it means that Northern Ireland actually complies to the UK regime for this just one specific aspect of the Common Framework. While there may not be much change to the status quo initially with the carryover of EU legislation under the majority of these 5 common frameworks, complexities could arise further down the line should the UK choose to diverge from the EU, and I discuss this a bit more in the next section. But within this regard, it does raise a few questions, and there's a few general questions there on the protocol listed, and these just seek really more detail and clarity on some areas in relation to how the protocol interacts with CFs, particularly into the roles and responsibilities between the UK government and the Northern Ireland Executive in dealing with changes and requirements under the protocol. I'll not go in and out through these in detail at this stage, just I'm aware of time. So in a similar vein, really, moving on from this to the next section is regulatory divergence. And as I've said before, it's becoming increasingly evident that the CFs provide a framework to manage divergence and its impacts across the four governments. And the paper provides some statements around divergence that are commonly used across the 5 CFs. So again, this issue of divergence, as I've said previously, is greatly impacted by the protocol. And while at present most of the CFs implement existing EU legislation and international obligations, this maintains currently the status quo. But really, it's more about what could happen down the line and in the future, and what say Northern Ireland has in this regard. Especially now the UK has the ability to make changes to its approach in these areas without the influence of the EU. And with that, Northern Ireland must continue to align with the areas listed then under the protocol. So for some CFs, this may be a considerable proportion, as I explained there with the chemicals and pesticides one, which could give opportunity for greater divergence in that area down the line. And the blue box in the paper looks at some potential areas of divergence should the UK in its final decision decide to take a different approach or standards to that of the EU. So, for example, the UK is suggesting a longer time frame for the introduction of bans on certain tattoo ink chemicals and a more phased approach for any ban on lead shots compared to the approach that would be adopted in Northern Ireland under EU requirements. So again, there's just a number of questions here seeking further clarity on the language used around Northern Ireland's involvement in changes and the impacts and levels of divergence. Northern Ireland's ability to discuss impacts of divergence, not just at the UK level, but also the EU level. The rules around monitoring and informing of these changes as they so happen, and resources and funding should Northern Ireland require more to meet EU requirements. And then also some in relation to cross-border divergence and alignment. Should the South seek, for instance, derogations or decide to go beyond EU requirements? And the blue box there gives an example with lead shots where some member states have gone beyond EU requirements. And also even should the South diverge slightly from the requirements of the CFs that apply to the areas of the CFs that would apply to Northern Ireland. So Mark has already touched upon this, but in the next section, just looking at parliamentary scrutiny, and we'll make reference here to the House of Lords Common Framework Scrutiny Committee, who's commented on the need for continued parliamentary and committee scrutiny of CFs. Looking across the 5 prioritised CFs in relation to this, parliamentary scrutiny and particularly at the monitoring and review and amendment stage appears to be relatively scant. But of those that do provide detail, the monitoring and review is conducted at an official level. However, there's really no detail of parliamentary level involvement within these areas. Now, an exceptional review may be triggered outside the normal review process and time frame, and this may be triggered by a significant issue or difference that may cause economic, social or environmental difficulties for Northern Ireland. And this in itself raises a number of questions, detailed there in the paper. So what constitutes, in relation to what constitutes a significant difference for Northern Ireland, and who decides this? And why there are differences in review and monitoring frequency across the 5 CFs explored. And then really what level of scrutiny in the monitoring and review process will the Northern Ireland Assembly and committees have, and at what stage? In a similar vein, really moving on to the next section is stakeholder engagement and involvement. And again, across the 5 CFs explored, there's really been very little detail provided on existing or future stakeholder engagement. And again, the House of Lords report has noted their concerns on this issue. Now, the UK government's opinion is that full stakeholder consultation may not always be needed due to CFs being primarily about establishing and maintaining existing intergovernmental arrangements rather than developing policy as such. So this again raises a number of questions at the end of this section around the lack of stakeholder engagement or detail of it, and how this will be addressed in the future by both the UK government and DAERA, and who will be involved and at what stage. The final section of the paper, you'll be glad to hear, is around resourcing and finance aspects. And again, it seems reasonable to expect an increase in resourcing requirements and financial implications, with one of the underlying common framework principles being to deliver a significant increase in decision-making powers for devolved administrations. However, none of the 5 prioritised CFs provide a detailed analysis of potential resourcing or financial implications. Now, the Fisheries Management and Support MOU does make general reference to finance and shared costs through what they have described as operational agreements. However, it doesn't provide any more detail, and it's not clear whether this would be a common approach to be used across the other common frameworks. And what is evident that the level of resourcing could differ substantially across the 5 common frameworks, depending on how much they require the setup of new infrastructures and decision-making fora, or whether they use existing ones. So again, this raises a number of questions, which includes whether more detail on resourcing and costs will be provided by DAERA, particularly should Northern Ireland face more costs aligning to the EU than the UK in certain areas, and whether similar to a recommendation made by the Welsh Committee, whether an explanatory memorandum alongside each common framework giving a financial impact assessment is something that should or could be considered. So really, this was just a quick run through those general observations. And really, this section provides a summary, as Mark already said, of the table provided in Appendix 1 in the paper. The final section of the paper does look at more specific questions on each of the individual common frameworks, but I'm aware of time this morning, so we're happy to discuss anything, or if members want to look at those at a later stage. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Susie and Mark, for your hard work and your detailed presentation. And we always appreciate your hard work, which we certainly don't take it for granted, and it really helps us in our role here. I suppose one of the things we'd like to ask any of you is I'm just thinking of the role of the devolved administrations in terms of, the seeing when there's like in terms of the common framework dispute resolutions, where does the devolved administrations fit in? In terms of the dispute resolution.
I suppose, Chair, I'll maybe take that, and I suppose the reference I made was the local minister effectively is key to that, and I suppose that's the reason I had flagged. What are there mechanisms effectively to deal with the lack of a minister going forward? For example, I think is a key issue for us. Now, hopefully, that's not a circumstance that we are facing, but I mean, as the architecture is written, it's not clear that there is a provision for that. There could well be, but I think it's an important part of clarity. In terms of the devolved administrations themselves, as to who the minister speaks to, that's not made clear. I think the engagement is between officials and ministers, but that's the reason I raised the point in terms of can a minister act, for example, without executive approval, because you might have different ministers, theoretically speaking, who might have different approaches to divergence or what was acceptable divergence, depending on their perspective.
And the other thing too is that why is it that the information presented on the COM frameworks doesn't appear to be presented in a uniform or a common way? That seems a bit. Well, why is that? Why do you think that is the case?
I think it's and Susie, feel free to chip in here. I think, Chair, one of the things that's very noticeable when you read them is that they were obviously written at different officials at different times. And I think given the complexity of them, it would have been unrealistic to expect one secretariat to provide them all, for example, because there is such a degree of specialist knowledge in relation to the policy areas. I think moving forward as they evolve, I think it would be useful from a perspective even of someone who's read them, if they did have a common template that they followed. I mean, Susie made reference, for example, there to the explanatory memoranda that would have accompanied changes to European law that would have come before the committee at times. And I think one of the major advantages to us as researchers, sometimes tasked to look at that, was that they had a common format. And that did make extracting the information you required easier, because you knew the exact heading you had to go and look under. This has been a slightly more challenging process in relation to looking at the five comparatively.
Yes, and also just to touch upon that point about the explanatory memoranda, it was something that we did become more used to and accustomed to when trying to look and compare as well. But the Welsh External Affairs and Additional Legislation Committee, that was one of the points that they had raised about producing an explanatory memorandum alongside a CF. Now, whether that would be done at the UK government level or whether this was something that they would be choosing to do themselves on a more sort of voluntary basis, but it's something that maybe could be explored.
And you see the fact that obviously we've got the protocol here, and you've got the common framework, and there's obviously a tension there, particularly if Britain continues on the path of divergence. How can these tensions be resolved, do you think?
I'll come in, and Mark, feel free to come in at any point. Obviously, the overall sort of negotiations and tensions that are relating to the protocol is not really something that I can comment on. But what I think would help with the implementation of the protocol and anything that comes down the line is that all four governments and devolved regions feel that they have a fair say in the process, and we appreciate that at the moment there isn't an awful lot of change, because it effectively is status quo with the carryover of EU legislation, and a lot of these CFs are based on existing EU requirements and legislation at the moment. But it's that possible and potential change down the line, and should there be any issues that come to the fore, do we have enough representation and say, and at at the correct stage as well. And I mean, when we look back to when we had any say with EU changes or requirements, there was a process that that we knew and we fed into, and at a particular stage, obviously appreciating that this is a new setup and stage, but I think if there was just more detail and reassurance that that Northern Ireland, and especially parliamentary scrutiny as well, where it comes in, I think it would provide a bit more reassurance.
Thank you.
Chair, and I would endorse everything Susie said, and I think the thing to realise too in relation to the protocol, what we're effectively talking about in terms of the potential challenges of divergence is linked to Annex 2 of the protocol. And obviously quite a few of the 5 CFs reference particular sections within Annex 2. Part of the challenge here is who monitors those changes, those potential. Through the process of dynamic alignment, there can be change made to Annex 2 of the protocol just as a matter of course. It doesn't require extensive scrutiny to occur. And I suppose that's one of those challenges, both I think for a devolved administration, particularly for the Assembly, for us even as a research service, as to how to capture that information. Because that is obviously, that's what's going to drive divergence. That's what's going to potentially drive the need for a dispute resolution process or an assessment of what is an acceptable level of divergence. So it's quite hard to it's crystal ball gazing in some ways, but I think what we can see with the fact that Annex 2 features in all the 5 CFs, it's going to happen.
And just at a point on that as well, in relation to Annex 2, as Mark said about changes, it's about changes to Annex 2 going down the line, but also we've already seen changes and additions made to Annex 2. And again, we're not sure of the process as to who gets informed of these changes. We were aware of them by the Council decision, and it was put onto the European Council's website. But other than that, we're not sure what sort of process is used to inform the likes of the Northern Ireland Government, DAERA, of these potential changes before they actually happen. So,
okay, thanks, Susie. And Mark, I'm going to move around the room here. William and Philip. William first.
Okay, thanks, Mark and Sue, for your presentation. And there's a lot of stuff on this that I believe is open to interpretation. I mean, do you not think that there'll be different people have different interpretations on some of this, and will it be a nightmare? Am I wrong or right?
I think, I suppose, William, what I would say is the proof will be in the pudding in terms of the operation of the frameworks. And I suppose we're still in the foothills of that process. And I suppose we're conscious of the fact that process will evolve over time. As Susie made the point, and I think it's a central point to consider, we're largely at a point where everybody's on the same page. I think the true test of the Common Frameworks process comes if people start to move to different pages. And that's, I think, is maybe the question moving forward as to how these will operate and whether they will be effective mechanisms. I mean, I go back to the presentation to the Brexit Freedoms bill, depending on how extensive that is, could have a wide-ranging impact across a wide range of policy areas. And I suppose I asked the question, well, how can common frameworks operate there as a means to manage divergence potentially if the government just effectively just writes off a wide range of regulations as irrelevant and out of date, whilst we might have to adhere to them. So there's big questions for me around that process.
Yeah, I was going to mention the Brexit Freedoms Bill too, but this is a proposal. It's not started. It's not as law as yet. Is that right? Still, that's only a proposal. Yeah,
that's correct. It's a proposal, and indeed, I checked it again yesterday. There's still no update as to when we're likely to either see a draft bill or introduction. So I mean, I think it's realistic to say it will be a matter for the next Assembly.
Okay, Mark. Thank you.
Philip?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair. My question's around the all Ireland nature. I mean, the third principle mentions social and economic linkages with the South, as well as a land border, but it seems that there's very little of the common frameworks making any operational reference to the South. So, I mean, I suppose my question is this element being ignored when it comes to the actual detail of the common frameworks, especially ones that touch on an all Ireland element?
I'll just come in briefly on that, and Mark, if you have anything then to add. Yes, that's certainly something that we have found across all five, and not even just in relation to the north-south element, but in relation to sort of the communication and dialogue for divergence going any direction. So whether that's EU and UK divergence, but then we also have that added complexity with us with down south should they decide to go beyond any EU requirements, and also the element of seeking derogations. And a lot of member states do rely on derogations, and we're not 100% sure where we fit with that. So should the south seek a derogation in a particular area, how do we go about that? Should we want to stay in alignment with them? We've seen in the past where the UK has sought derogations on our behalf, and again, where do we fit within those existing ones now that the UK is not part of the EU? So, I mean, certainly, the north-south aspect specifically, yes, there's very little mention to that, and I think just the different directions of divergence as well. For us, being very unique, and as you say, that particularly that principle 3 really comes into play there, Philip. Yeah.
And Susie, thank you. So you're saying, kind of confirming that there's very little mention of it. So how is it supposed to? I mean, is it defined how it's actually supposed to operate in terms of best practice, or is that not actually even defined either?
Mark, maybe you can come in on this a bit, but really it's in and around those decision-making structures that are in place. And as Mark has said, there's really relatively little detail at this stage, and for us to know exactly what it would mean for the north-south aspect. Again, there has been very little mention of that within the decision making. A lot of it is really based between the UK government and devolved regions, but bringing in that north-south element at this stage in the detail that's provided, there doesn't seem to be a lot. But Mark, maybe you have a bit more on that.
I think, Philip, it's a valid question. There are maybe some oblique references to consultation and stakeholders. I mean, there are areas, and you'll be well aware, the likes of the animal health and welfare framework. I mean, animal health, for the sake of epidemiology, the island of Ireland is a single unit. So, I mean, in terms of the representation on the decision-making fora, you don't see representation from bodies in the south. But you do see maybe in reference, oblique references, and I can't find the one. I was actually trying to find it there off the top of. There are references to contacting and engaging with stakeholders, and in our context, it's almost inevitable that some of those stakeholders would be people based in the south. But it's not explicitly referenced as such, and there aren't named bodies or named individuals off the top of my head. Now, it's something I'll quite happily go away and have a look at and come back to you with any very specific references, and that may be more helpful rather than trying to search for it here at the minute. If you'd be happy with that.
Yep, no, that's fine. And then just one other question is kind of following on from an issue raised by the chair. So, I mean, there's a raft of these common frameworks, but I'm starting to question, the point of the North joining a common framework in an area where we're bound by EU law and other jurisdictions aren't. What is the point of us being in common frameworks under those guises?
I think that's a valid question, and I suppose until we see how the actual common frameworks operate, I mean, if as Susie made reference to at the start, where the language has evolved from having common standards and common approaches to managing divergence. If the level of divergence potentially grows between NI and GB, you could begin to question, and I think that's regardless of your position on divergence, whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, you do become to question, well, how could you actually operate a common framework? Does the operation of the common framework effectively become a dispute resolution process, or trying to establish what an acceptable level of divergence is? And that, I can see where there could definitely be major challenges in the operation of the same. And we keep emphasising, and I can't emphasise enough, a lot of this really just, particularly from our perspective and a divergence perspective, comes back to Annex 2 of the protocol and how that changes. Because if it changes extensively, we will be pulled in that direction. If Brexit Freedoms bill comes in and has extensive changes, we'll be pulled in that direction. So there's potentially divergence pressures from a number of sources. And that's what this process will have to try and deal with.
And also, as well, in relation to the amount that a common framework applies to Northern Ireland, we've looked at a couple of examples, and as I said about the chemicals and pesticides one, the majority of that common framework doesn't apply to Northern Ireland. It's the existing EU legislation under the protocol, with one rather niche area, sustainable use of pesticides, which will fall under the UK regime. So, at what point do you call it a UK common framework? It's essentially a GB one, and then we're just included in it for that one element. And that's as it is at the moment. It's what happens even in going down the line. Should we see, as we already have seen, additions to the protocol made, which essentially maybe brings Northern Ireland completely out of a common framework? Or the other way, bring us further into a common framework. So it's, as Mark has said, it's for us to be able to be engaged at the monitoring stage, and when we will be informed and how we can be informed and on what say we have. So I'm not sure if that helps any.
No, that has been useful. So thank you, Chair. That's me finished.
Problem. Okay then, as I have no other members wishing to ask questions, I want to take the opportunity to thank Susie and Mark for joining us here this morning, and we hope to be seeing and hearing from you again. Okay?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Right. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
You do.
Okay, members, we're going to move on now to item number 8. It's a written briefing, DAERA Business Plan 21-22 update, page 65 of your pack. It's a written update from the department. You members hear me okay? Yeah, that's all right. I thought I was muted there. You'll recall the department provided a briefing on the 9th of December, and the committee agreed to request an update for today's meeting. And you'll note from the briefing that the 18 priority targets in the plan are either partially achieved or on course to be achieved by the end of March 2022. I'm going to, John has asked, wants to ask a question, but are you okay, John? Maybe if we get Nick to do a quick brief and then we ask the question, John, is that all right? Okay. Okay, Nick, can I invite you to do a brief, bit of a briefing here for the committee?
Chair, yes, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, members. Just to run through some of the headline issues that the committee team has pulled out with the updated briefing provided by the department in respect of its 21-22 business plan update. So target 1, which is in relation to achievement on EU exit activities, has been graded by the department as partially achieved due to the fact that legislation has been delayed due to the ongoing protocol negotiations and a delay in having all of the 15 common frameworks published. Members will be aware that only 11 have been published as they stand in relation to DAERA's remit. Also, under Target 2, which is outlined on page 89 of the pack, pertains to maintaining GB, EU and international market access. And one of the specific measures within that is compliance with all relevant sanitary and phytosanitary policy and legislation. That is currently graded as partially achieved, and members may wish to note that there is no reference within that point in relation to the EU audit report that was laid with the Assembly Library in January, highlighting the significant shortcomings with regards to compliance with those checks. Another measure of note is Target 6, which is about managing the DAERA forestry estate, and a specific measure which had aimed to plant 600 hectares of new woodland by the end of March 22. Unfortunately, that has now been graded as not achieved or will not be achieved, despite having been on track for completion before December. So the Department has advised that the total number of hectares anticipated at the year end will be 540. I suppose that is an issue of note, given that it had been previously on track to meet the 600 hectares. In terms of Target 8, one of the specific measures was to transpose elements of the Single-Use Plastics Directive into local legislation, and that is also not achieved due to delays within DEFRA in respect of bringing forward the relevant regulations at Westminster. A Target 9 release is relative to the publication of the Food Strategy Framework, and a common theme that is going to appear in a few of these actions is that it's been graded as partially achieved because it will not be possible to gain executive approval for the published food strategy by the end of March. Similarly, moving on to Target 11, which some of the specific measures within it are to publish the first overarching environment strategy for Northern Ireland. So members will recall that we have fed back to the Department our views on the environment strategy and are due indeed at our last meeting with the mandate to receive an update in respect of that. However, it is graded as not achieved, given that it will require cross-party approval via the executive in order to finalise it and publish the final strategy. There's a further measure under Target 11 to publish a new marine plan. That has been graded as not achieved, and the Department intends to move it to its business plan for the next financial year. Further, given the need for executive approval or endorsement, the measures against Target 12 in respect of progressing the green growth strategy have been designated as not achieved. And at item 13, the measures in respect of bringing forward the bovine eradication strategy proposals have been graded as partially achieved, and it is indicated that the new strategy will be agreed by the Minister before the end of March this year, and that operational delivery of that strategy will be incorporated into the business plan for next year. The Department also highlights delays in finalising and publishing its new Animal Health and Welfare Strategic Framework, as well as implementing necessary changes associated with animal health law due to delays in receiving information from the European Commission. The remaining either non-compliant or partially achieved actions pertain to internal actions within DAERA in terms of introducing a people capacity and capability plan, improving its employee engagement index score, and development and implementation of its innovation strategy. So, Chair, those are some of the highlighted areas of either partial achievement or non-achievement within the business plan, and I thought it would be worthwhile bringing those to the attention of the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Right. Okay. Right. So I just want to pick up on a couple of points. I'm going to move around to John in a second here. Then, the food strategy, right? It's amber and mightn't be met. Okay. And because obviously because we don't, it needs to be agreed departmental food strategy needs to be agreed by 31st of March. But clearly that's not possible because of the absence of an executive for Target 9. And then I suppose the question I would ask as well, I know there's massive frustration about the delay on the TB strategy, That was to be agreed by the Minister by the end of March, which is this month, and will depend on stakeholder buy-in, functioning assembly, and executive operation. So, is the case then that the fact that we have no executive, is this the reason why we don't have our food strategy framework and that there's been a delay on the bovine TB strategy, for example? I just make those points. Maybe could we maybe write to the department to clarify some of that, Nick? John?
Chair, thank you. And it's with no pleasure that I say the update on the business plan as presented amounts to nothing short of environmental failure. That fact is jumping off not just the page, but actually a number of the pages. I think there are a number of matters I would like to raise specifically, although there are obviously wider ranging issues in terms of achievement, but very specifically I'd like to address the fact that working collaboratively across government to align policies on the green growth strategy, failure. How can that be addressed? 600 hectares of new woodland across Northern Ireland, not massively ambitious, but failure. How soon can that be rectified? To provide a second iteration of the marine plan, failure. Can we clarify or seek clarification on when work on this marine plan first commenced? And I've raised this before. It adds up 2 years, but still we're not there, nor are we, it would appear, nearly there. And finally, and this one's more general, but very important in relation to all of the matters I've raised and many other matters. Delivery of a Northern Ireland environment strategy, failure, cannot be done without a Northern Ireland executive. Now, I don't expect that officials will be able to answer that in great detail or with any definite deadline, but the fact remains that these are collectively just one big range of failures across environmental plans, strategies, deadlines and ambitions. And if we could, as a committee, seek in the time we have left to get from the department what it plans to do in the short to medium term to address these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. There's too many ambers and reds in this business plan from when you scroll down through it. It's shocking.
Yep.
Just, Nick, have you picked up on some of that there?
Chair, certainly, yes, indeed. We will correspond with the department outlining the concerns which the committee has highlighted and seeking an urgent update in respect of the red and amber actions and the specific points that have been highlighted by members.
Yeah. So we've got the food strategy, environment strategy not published because of no executive, and it looks like that the bovine TB strategy as well. So there's just so much. I say there are too many reds and ambers in this report when you scroll down through it. So okay. So I'll just see here. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay.
Yeah, Chair, sorry, but before we leave that, would the committee wish to consider writing to the Minister also and/or the incoming Permanent Secretary? There was coverage yesterday of new Permanent Secretaries being put in place, and I think we should, at the earliest opportunity, express our concerns on these issues to that incoming Permanent Secretary.
Thank you. William? William?
Instead of 600 hectares, it's 540 hectares. Is that am I right in saying that? Nick, is that right? Thought like that they were going to meet 540 hectares, not 600 hectares. Is that the case?
Yes, Chair William, yes, indeed. The goal had been to plant 600 hectares of new woodland by the end of March, and in the last update that we received in respect of the business plan, that was on track to be achieved, so it was graded as partially compliant. And now in the latest update, it is not going to. The department has indicated that it's not going to be achieved. and that they will have delivered 540 hectares by the end of the year.
Well, I'll say this: while it's not achieved, it's a very big achievement, given that you can't get trees out of the UK, given the rigorous implementation of the protocol that some members wanted. You can't even get trees, so I think they've done very well, to manage as well as they've done in that regard, anyway.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, William. Okay, members. Okay, thank you for your comments in relation to that there, and Nick has them noted, and we will be making representation to the department on that there. Okay. So, members, we're happy to write to the department seeking confirmation writing in respect of the next steps against the partially and the not achieved actions, and when the business plan will be developed. Okay, members. Okay, members, item number 9 is a DAERA consultation on proposals for Inshore Vessel Monitoring System for fishing vessels under 12 metres overall length. In your table pack, you will see a letter from the department regarding a consultation that will be carrying out in respect of mandating all vessels under 12 metres in length to have a vessel monitoring system, otherwise known as a VMS, installed. There are multiple benefits of having a VMS on fishing vessels, including more accurate tracking of where fishing takes place, improved marine planning, and safety benefits in terms of recovery of lost or damaged vessels. Both the English and Welsh governments are introducing a VMS for under 12 metre vessels, and the Isle of Man is consulting on the implementation of these. Also, DAERA consultation will be open for a period of 10 weeks from after the committee has endorsed the department proposals. Members, if any questions on the contact, any questions, and if we are content, write to the department. John, you are down here for a question.
Chair, yeah, thank you, and I'm grateful that this information has been brought to us. I get that the vessels monitoring systems can record accurate location, speed of a vessel, and also the heading of that vessel, but I'm wondering if we could seek clarification on whether this process can be used to do more than that. For example, if it could be used to identify further marine protected areas and the ASSIs, and also if it could be used in any way in achieving biodiversity objectives. I think it would be useful to get that information.
Yeah. I think the other thing I was thinking about as well would be, for the, I'm wondering obviously I'd be very supportive of these being installed, but I'm wondering, for the smaller vessels, could they result in being hamstrung by bureaucracy, and is there some additional costs maybe which could be difficult to bear by a very small operator? I'm just wondering, Nick, do we have any view from the industry in relation to this consultation, or what their any view from them on what their views are on it?
Chair, no, just to be clear, this is a pre-consultation notice by DAERA, so they are advising that they intend to consult on this with the industry, and before they launch that, they're seeking the committee's, I suppose, endorsement of the intent to go out and consult.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Claire?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering, on that notification it says that the consultations, obviously we are being notified of it, and then it will be hosted on the direct citizen space online, but I'm wondering if there's anything that we could do as a committee to really promote that and make sure that it's out there. And I know that I've spoken on this issue to some people, not a huge amount, but some from within the sector, and there's mixed views on it. Some people have concerns about I suppose privacy for people working on boats. Other people are very supportive that it doesn't need to be, that these vessels don't need to be looking at the boat and the people. It's about the nets and the waters, really. So there's mixed views on it, but I think that we should get it out there as widely as possible in terms of trying to get consultation responses to it.
Yep. So, members, would it be fair to say then, obviously some of us have highlighted some questions relating to this here. So are we content that we basically we write to the department saying that we're content for the consultation open, and also, if there's anything we can do through our own committee's social media or through our own individually, collectively, to promote and encourage responses to this consultation? Okay. Okay, members. Item number 10 then is a written briefing from Nick, our clerk, the Agriculture Support Common Framework draft position paper. It's at page 85 is the committee position paper on the Agriculture Support Common Framework. You recall from our meeting on the 17th of February that we took evidence from representatives of the Ulster Farmers Union and the Livestock and Meat Commission in respect to these proposals, and they were considered along with a written submission from the department. Common Framework primarily covers policy issues around agricultural subsidies, marketing standards, crisis measures and data collection. They also cover the monitoring of the marketplace for potential disturbances which may require government intervention. Nick, do you want to brief the committee?
Chair, thank you. And this follows the meeting last week where we considered 3 draft Common Framework position papers, which the committee will hopefully publish before the end of March. And in the interests of time and to avoid repetition, I'll avoid any of the background information in this paper, which is common across all common frameworks, and indeed any of the helpful points that were raised by Mark and Susie in their briefing earlier, many of which are covered in the paper. However, at page 98 of the packs are some specific considerations and views that were highlighted by stakeholders in respect of the Agri Support Common Framework that members may wish to include in the position paper. So we were advised by stakeholders that in principle the common framework structures as drafted are seen to be broadly welcome, and it's a positive aspiration to achieve policy alignment between jurisdictions. However, there was concern expressed that the framework has no legislative basis and it may be unenforceable, and therefore its outworkings would be based on a so-called gentleman's agreement. We also heard concern that any additional regulatory or bureaucratic barrier that would reduce the local agri-food sector's exports to GB would present significant challenges for local producers, and therefore there is a need to continue for continued alignment of policies. We also, as members will recall, heard that the industry is already experiencing significant challenges regarding the importation of animal medicines to Northern Ireland due to policy divergence, given alignment with protocol requirements. Stakeholders did note that the extent of engagement between professionals and the industry in general and DAERA in respect of policy matters in agri support is good and effective, but it was reiterated that there should be viable communication channels to ensure that the needs, interests and views of the industry are transmitted to DAERA through to framework groups and vice versa. We also heard that the proposed introduction of the Market Monitoring Group under the Common Framework is a very positive step forward in order to centralise expertise and understanding of market forces, which is crucial to helping drive and maintain profitability where possible. We wrote to DAERA for its view on the Common Framework, and the Department did not highlight any specific issues to their committee in respect of the Agri Support Framework, and stated that the Department is content that the framework provides the flexibility for it to move forward with its proposals to develop and implement a future agricultural support policy that addresses the challenges facing the local agricultural sector and the environment. In terms of specific observations on this Common Framework, there is an element of ambiguity in the Common Framework as drafted, in that it states that potential disputes should be raised in the first instance to the DEFRA Strategic Oversight Programme Board, but elsewhere it is stated that an ad hoc group of senior civil servants could be formed to discuss an issue. The Common Framework notes that stakeholders will be engaged with on an ongoing proactive basis, but there is no prescriptive list of these stakeholders. There is provision within the Agri Support Common Framework to involve third parties in the Common Framework review mechanism, which Mark highlighted earlier, and that's potentially a positive move. And similarly, as we discussed last week, many of the other common themes across the Common Framework, such as the uncertainty about Northern Ireland's position within decision-making forums, the specific dispute resolution procedure, and the need for continued parliamentary engagement have all been replicated in the draft position paper. It's also unclear what the processes will be for engaging with industry representatives to ensure that their views are considered in policy deliberations. And therefore, in terms of suggested recommendations, it's suggested that the position paper be forwarded by DAERA to the Cabinet Office as part of the Common Framework scrutiny process. DAERA should also seek to clarify how and if the subsidy control pill will have any implications for the delivery of agri-support policy locally. DAERA should also confirm if Northern Ireland will have the ability to propose policy changes to other jurisdictions in GB, which are independent of its obligations to maintain parity with the EU legislation. It may also be useful for DAERA to provide a short annual update to the committee in respect of the functioning and effectiveness of the Common Framework, and to notify it on an ongoing basis of any changes which are agreed to the terms of reference of the groups established. It's also advised that the committee should be informed of any substantive policy disputes that are managed under the auspices of the framework relating to local activities, and for DAERA to clarify the appropriate forum to consider issues in the scenario whereby Northern Ireland is compelled to maintain parity with EU legislation and other jurisdictions in GB do not follow suit, and this leads to divergence. Again, a common theme throughout all of the Common Framework papers is DAERA should seek to clarify if the Secretary of State will assume responsibility for representing local interests in the functioning of the Common Framework should the local executive collapse or there not be an ERA minister in place for any reason, and that DAERA should set out how it intends to maintain regular engagement with industry and professionals in respect of agri-support policy to inform its views on participation in the Common Framework structure. So, Chair, those are the salient views and observations and potential recommendations that the committee may wish to include in its position paper on the agri-support Common Framework. Thank you.
Okay, Nick, thank you for collating that there. And unless members have any views on it, certainly I want to thank you. Certainly, I'm content with it. If members have any views, either now or after, later on today, before the close of play, just you can fire them into Nick there. But thank you for that, Nick. Okay. Okay. Nick, we're going to move, or members, we're going to move on now to item number 11. It's the Pesticides Common Framework. Okay. Written Briefing, Chemicals and Pesticides Common Framework, Draft Position Paper. 104 is a committee position paper on the Chemicals and Pesticides Common Framework. You'll recall from a meeting on the 17th of February that we took evidence from representatives of the UFU and the Ulster Arable Society and NI Water in respect of these. Nick, do you want to give us a briefing on the position paper?
Chair, thank you. And again, I'll not repeat any issues that were previously included within the last position paper, so I'll only seek to highlight the specific issues on the chemicals and pesticides. So members will recall that whenever we had our stakeholder discussion on this issue, there were a number of points raised, and these are at page 116 of the pack. So we were advised that there is a fundamental and important need to ensure regulatory alignment and harmonisation in respect of oversight and testing of water facilities across Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. There was a lengthy discussion about how the Common Framework is a very high-level governance document, and due consideration needs to be given as to how decisions taken at policy level will translate into impacts for farmers, growers and producers on the ground. We were also advised that presently there is very little proactive engagement between industry and DAERA in respect of chemicals and pesticides policy, and that there's been little to no prior consultation in respect of this framework. We also heard about the current divergences in this area, and locally there is what has been described as a regulatory no man's land in terms of oversight because the Chemicals Regulation Division of the Health and Safety Executive in the UK has not taken on responsibility of regulating products for use locally. And we also heard of the difficulties that, as a result of complying with protocol regulations, which effectively means that local producers need to adhere with 2 regulatory systems, chemicals and pesticide producers would need to develop a new bespoke label for products used here, and that this is simply not economically viable for many manufacturers. This is therefore increasingly leading to a fewer range of chemicals and pesticides which are available to local growers. And we also heard about the potential risk of future and further divergence in this sphere, particularly in relation to maximum residue levels of different chemicals. And we heard about the issues should be in the scenario whereby the EU may allow a specific maximum level for a certain food product, and if that differs to that in GB, that particular food product therefore couldn't be sold into the GB market. And that was obviously highlighted as a significant concern by some local producers. DAERA did not highlight any specific issues to the committee in respect of this common framework, and noted that the governance structures and decision-making processes have been in operation during the past year, and that DAERA officials have worked collaboratively with DEFRA and devolved administrations across the areas involved. In respect of some specific recommendations on this common framework, in addition to those which are translated from other framework papers, it suggested that DAERA should urgently engage with the Health and Safety Executive Chemicals Regulations Division to discuss and clarify regulation of the use of chemicals and pesticides locally, and ensure that the issues being experienced by local producers in terms of access to increasingly fewer chemicals and pesticides products due to regulatory complexity are escalated to the appropriate level within the common framework or joint specialised committee structure in order to seek a resolution. And Chair, the rest of the recommendations and observations in those papers have previously been discussed. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Nick. And are members content that this position paper, along with the previous position paper on the Agriculture Support Plan Framework, be published and always incorporating any specific points from the raised briefing we received previously? Okay, thank you. Okay, members, I'm going to move on to item number 12, is correspondence. It's page 156 to your pack. There's a response from the Minister from the Economy regarding our comments on the Department's energy strategy. The Minister has provided answers to some of the questions we have raised. There is presently no incentive other than the price offered by Para NI to encourage operators to feed into the grid. The Minister notes that NIE and Sony will consult on a support plan and develop a smart system plan, which will seek to address some of the issues in terms of grid connectivity. The Department has presented proposals to the Executive regarding future onshore petroleum licence policy, and there will be a public consultation in due course following Executive endorsement. The Minister for Infrastructure has commissioned an electric vehicle infrastructure task force to set an action plan by autumn 2022 to deliver a fit-for-purpose charging network. The Minister notes that there will be a range of options for rural dwellers made available in the years ahead in terms of green domestic energy such as heat pumps and biofuels, and an alternative to gas grid connectivity. The Department of Communities and DOE will work closely on measures to ensure that low-income households are provided with full information and advice in respect of energy transition. Okay, members. If you have any information or anything in relation to that there. Okay. Okay, members. Page 2221 is correspondence first from Sir Michael Lyons, who is chairing the independent review of Invest NI, advising that his call for evidence is open until the 1st of April, and can I ask members, if members wish to respond to the call for evidence, so please do so by the end of this month. Okay. Members, page 216 of the pack is a response to the Department of Infrastructure to our questions sent in February regarding issues within the wider planning system. The department has advised that it has a range of performance metrics which it monitors in respect of planning applications approvals. It hosts an interdepartmental planning forum which DAERA representatives attend to discuss issues and improvement plans. In January this year, DFI published a report with a number of recommendations to help improve and streamline the planning process. DFI is working with local councils to roll out an ICT planning platform which will digitise most of the planning process and improve information sharing. While DFI is not persuaded of the case of deemed consent when a statutory consultee fails to respond in time, the department is committed to explore this further and give consideration to how councils can proceed if statutory consultees do not respond within the required timeframes. Okay. Members?
Chair.
Yes, Claire, go ahead.
Thanks. Chair, can we ask the Environment Agency? I mean, they are a statutory consultee, for example. Could we get information from them how many planning applications they were meant to respond to, how many they responded to, how many they objected to? Just get a breakdown of their responses.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
You know that, Nick? Yeah.
Chair, yes, indeed.
Yeah. Okay. Members, can I also suggest that we respond to DFI seeking clarity on whether the new ICT system will enable applicants to check the progress of their applications, what measures may be available other than deemed consent, and if consideration has been made to rationalising the number of repeat consultations which can be carried out for specific proposals. Okay. And members, okay to action the correspondence as suggested index sheet of page 122.
Can I come in on more?
Sorry, Claire?
Can I come in on one more, please?
Yeah, absolutely, go ahead.
Thanks. Listen, we got the Committee for the Economy on the forwarded us the Feminist Recovery Plan as related to our committee. Is there any way that we could even forward a copy of that onto the department or the minister for their response to the recommendations made within that report? I think it's just in line of, we've released a report on women in agriculture this week, and I just think it would tie in nicely as well.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Thank you.
I'm sure the whole committee's okay with that. Okay, members, the forward work programme, item 13, it's on page 224 of your packs. Okay, the forward work programme. Okay, members, okay, item 14 is any other business. Members have any other business they want to raise?
My committee again, Chair.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Listen, there was a story I caught that was reported today in the Beltail. I think Sam McBride covered it, and it was to do with a whistleblowing case within the department. And just want to raise it. I think it should be a matter of concern for this committee. I've certainly never encountered this story before, and this is the first that I'm hearing about it. But it's raising some serious issues. I know that we've all got a serious issue already with vets in the department and having enough vets to do checks at the ports, whatever. But this is concerning one senior vet who came forward with whistleblowing concerns, who's now saying here that constructively dismissed and an ongoing legal case within the courts. I'm not sure if the other committee members have seen this story today. It's given me a lot of concern, and I'm wondering if we could maybe pick this up with the department, with the minister directly really, and ask for any clarity on what's going on with this case and the claims being made.
Yeah, I think it's fair to ask for the department for department response. Yeah, that being for asking for department response to that. Okay. Okay, members, I don't see any other business down here. So basically, the date and time of the next meeting, we're going to meet next Wednesday now, not next Thursday, meeting next Wednesday, 16th of March at 10 a.m. Again, be a virtual meeting streamed on the Assembly website. So I want to thank you all for joining this morning, and thank anyone who's been listening in to our proceedings as well. And I'll see you across the floor at the start of the week, and we'll see you online here on Wednesday. Okay, everybody? Take care now.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.